That's as thousands of farmers have marched on Westminster today. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities. However, Environment Secretary Steve Reed says because of the previous government, Labour had no choice.
We have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Speaking at the protests earlier today, TV presenter and farm owner Jeremy Clarkson said Rachel Reeves has used a blunderbuss to hit farmers.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, you know, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
Elsewhere, Russia says Ukraine has fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike on Russia's Bryansk region this morning. Now, Russia also says it's changed its nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over the US missile decision. Speaking earlier, Sir Keir Starmer addressed the G20 in Brazil, telling Putin to get out of Ukraine.
My leadership, Britain will never be absent from the world table. We will work with partners across the G20. But one nation stands apart. For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine.
Meanwhile, following widespread snow and ice today, the UK is preparing for further bad weather over the coming days. A new ice warning has now come into force for much of southern England, the Midlands and eastern Wales, which will remain in place until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's alongside several other warnings for snow and ice issued across the UK, as the Met Office has issued warnings that vehicles could become stranded, power cuts may occur and rural areas could be cut off. Those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Everything that can go wrong for Keir Starmer is going wrong. The politest, the gentlest, the most hard-working people in this country are here in a mass protest. The farmers of Britain, the farmers of the United Kingdom are marching past because of this disgraceful, rapacious and unfair attack on farming economics and the ability of our country to produce food. It is one of the most shameful bits of socialist legislation that we have seen, not just from this Labour government, from previous Labour governments too. What are they doing? They're going to take 20% of the value of farms on farms that make 0.5% return on capital each year. That means they want 40 years of profit from every farmer in this country. 40 years of profit means there's no economy in farming, there's no business in farming, and there's no food production in this country. This is a really serious attack on our way of life, on the way of life in the countryside, and I'm not just talking about Somerset today, I'm talking about the whole of the United Kingdom. I've seen people here today from Derbyshire, from Northern Ireland, from across our great country, who are fearful that their livelihoods, their way of life, their history is being destroyed. There is land in this country that was bought by tenant farmers after the war, when this country recognised that it must never again be completely dependent on overseas imports. There are farmers who will have had land in their families not just for generations but for hundreds of years. This break with our history is being destroyed by a government that is a government of vandals, a government that has no concern for the prosperity and freedom of this nation. It is not surprising that I have behind me some of the best-mannered people in England who will not stand for it. Up with this they will not put. They deserve my support, they deserve your support, they deserve the support of the nation. This is one of the worst pieces of policy that I have ever seen, and I hope it is overturned in the interest of the future of our great country, the United Kingdom.
Well, as ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com, and I'm very pleased now to be joined by the Shadow Minister for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Dr Neil Hudson. Neil, thank you very much for coming in. First of all, if the Conservatives get back into government, we would reverse this? That's a clear policy promise.
Absolutely clear. I was on the stage today when the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, said that, very much so, that if we get into power in a few years' time, the Conservatives will reverse this cruel tax. And it's a senseless tax and it needs to be reversed.
And it will have a profound effect on the countryside, won't it, as farmers have to sell up to pay it. That the Labour Party is saying, well, they can pay it over 10 years. But that attracts a 7.75% tax interest rate, and so anything that you delay for 10 years has effectively doubled. So there's no real amelioration from the 10-year payment.
The Labour government have brought this in quickly without a full impact assessment, so they don't really know the impact. But we've seen today the thousands of people on the street. Succession planning in farming is stressful at the best of times, and in terms of discussions around the farm kitchen table about sons and daughters taking on the farm from mum and dad, now with this punitive inheritance tax policy where the son or daughter is going to have to think about selling part of, if not all of the farm, to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds of tax, when actually they're going to be drawing an income each year. Some farmers take, £19,000 a year of income. Yes, the land is worth a lot, but it's, as you said in your introduction, is passed down through generations to produce the food that we, the British people, need.
And the economics of farming have long been pretty difficult. It's long hours of hard work for a low return on capital. They could sell up and be really quite well off. And farmers will be tempted to do that.
It is one of the most stressful occupations. I'm a veterinary surgeon by profession, so I've worked with farmers for a lot of my working life. And they work 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. In inclement weather, they have to face incredible stresses, financial, extreme weather events, flooding, acute animal disease outbreaks. To have this inheritance tax policy thrown on them now, one of the things I am passionate about is that the Labour Party do not understand the mental health impacts on the farming communities that this policy will bring in. And that is really, really worrying.
And I think I read you were the first vet to be elected to Parliament in over 100 years, and that you were motivated to do it after the disaster of Foot and Mouth, another Labour government not understanding the countryside. Is there a hostility between Labour and the countryside and rural areas?
I think there is. You're right, Jacob. I spent some time in the front line as a veterinary surgeon in the 2001 foot and mouth outbreak, and the Labour government of the day mishandled it. They didn't call the army in early, they didn't shut things down, they played politics with it. So I vowed I wanted to use my professional background and come in and see if I could help inform policy from behind the scenes. And very much, I think there's a disconnect between Labour, who don't understand rural communities, they don't understand farming, and I think they're just treating these people with contempt and actually saying, well, oh, there's only a minority of people, when actually their figures don't stack up. The bulk of people out there, the NFU, the CLA, the Tenant Farmers Association, when you look at the numbers, the majority of farms are going to be hit by this. But Labour are doubling down and saying, oh, it's only a small number of people that are going to be hit by this.
But does it actually fit in with Labour's view of the world, that it doesn't like intergenerational wealth? It believes in a socialist nirvana, and this is part of how they're wanting to achieve it, and they got a majority of 170, So to some extent they're entitled to.
They don't like that as well. And actually farmers are the custodians of our country. They look after our environment, they nurture it, and they produce the food that we desperately need. And one of the things that we are very concerned about is that this government doesn't understand the concept that food security is national security. And if you jeopardise the farming supply that we are dealing with today, then we are going to be not nationally resilient. And that is crazy in the complicated global situation that we find ourselves in.
And so how would you look to policy to evolve to help farmers to make farming more economic in this country?
Absolutely. I think we've got to reward farmers for what they do. I think we've got to be saying to them, look, producing food is a good thing. That is a public good. And we need to protect farmland, precious farmland. The Labour Party now are eating into food-producing land, putting industrial solar plants on them when there's plenty of agricultural buildings, there's lots of brownfield sites where you can stick solar plants. And once that farming land has gone, it has gone. And the other thing we underestimate is if you hollow out communities and you take the people out, these farmers have their kids in the local primary schools. They go to the local churches as well. These communities will be hollowed out. And so, yes, they might be very nice to visit, but there'll be no one there.
But it's really an attack on the whole rural way of life.
Absolutely.
It is a Labour socialist hostility to the countryside, which they think is basically rich and Tory. It's part of their class warfare.
It is, and it shows a deep lack of understanding. And I think we've got to realise, in the pandemic, we realised the concept of key workers in our NHS, but also the people that produced our food, the farmers, the people who work in abattoirs, the vets, the lorry drivers, etc. Farmers then very quickly, once things calmed down, then started to be the villains in the piece again. And we've got the Labour government now saying to people, oh, well, you need to stop eating meat, you need to stop eating dairy. We all know that meat and dairy are part of a balanced diet, and farmers produce this food for us, and then it's for people to choose what they eat.
I think that's such a good point, Neil. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm now joined by the distinguished former Labour MP, Sean Simon. Sean, thank you very much for joining us. Is this all about Labour hating the countryside and at COP admitting on the quiet that we'd have to cut our consumption of meat and dairy? Basically, Labour wants to damage the countryside.
I think it's a shame that you have to cover this in this really kind of knockabout and kind of cardboard cutout, hugely exaggerated kind of way, because I think there are serious issues that it would be much better if we could have a serious conversation about. I live in a rural community. I can not just do I live in a rural community. I can walk 20 minutes in that direction to a cousin's farm, and I can walk half an hour in another direction to another cousin's farm. I've got lots of farm owners in my family who are angry about this, no doubt. I do not dispute at all that farmers are very angry about this. I also, it's quite clear, if you look at the numbers from the impartial sources, so not the NFU and the Country Landowners Association, but the IFS and the OBR, the Treasury, the BBC, people who don't have a vested...
I don't think the Treasury or the BBC are either of them independent. The BBC is an outpost of the Labour Party, and the Treasury gets everything wrong.
The BBC is the nearest thing that we have to an independent national broadcaster.
Oh, come off it. It's a left-wing... I mean, of course you like it because it's on your side.
And Treasury figures are produced by independent civil servants and
incompetent civil servants who are always wrong. I mean, I wouldn't trust Treasury figures further than I could throw the Treasury building.
And even you admitted implicitly that the OBR and the IFS are in fact independent bodies, and they all say that the same thing. They all come up with the same number, which is that this is not going to affect more than 500 farms a year, which is not nothing. That is still important, and I think there is an issue between Labour and the countryside. I'm Labour, and I was an urban politician, even though my family come from the countryside, and I do think there is a disconnect between Labour and the countryside. But I would like to fix that, whereas you're just trying to make it worse.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to protect the countryside, because if Labour had said... How
is your monologue helping farmers? Because Labour's not going to listen to that, are they? That's just class war in reverse.
Because Labour is trying to destroy the family farm. And that you know perfectly well that £1 million, and it's £1 million for the business assets of the farm and for the agricultural land. You know a tractor costs at least £100,000 now.
Plus £1 million inheritance allowance, so that's £2 million.
That's right. It's £1 million. It's £1 million of allowance. It doesn't become £2 million. It's £1 million of allowance that you have for your business assets and your agricultural land. So that will be your milking parlour, your tractors, your combine harvesters.
The animals.
£1 million, the animals. £1 million is only 100 acres. 100 acres is barely an economic farm nowadays.
And if you have a small bakery, you're taxed after £1 million at 40%. And how is that?
But that's because that's an equally stupid policy. This attack on small businesses has received the most clarity around farming, but it's the same for people running other small businesses that have assets behind them. It's great for businesses that don't have assets that they need, so software businesses and things like that. But any manufacturing business that is asset heavy will be really penalised by this. It's a terrible policy, not just for farmers, and thank you for broadening it out, but for businesses generally.
The point that I was just making, as you perfectly well know, is that farmers already are a hugely special case. They're a hugely privileged, exceptional case that get huge benefits that other parts of the economy don't get. Now, we could have a reasonable discussion about whether that is whether that is right, but let's have the discussion in those terms. Let's talk about why farmers should get special treatment and what the special treatment should be, and not just have a slapstick attack on the Labour government as class warriors and haters. I do think Labour is far more than it's a rural party. It does draw most of its support from the cities. Its MPs are mainly representing urban people who often don't feel great sympathy for the countryside. But if you think what you did out there in Parliament Square today helped to improve that situation and make things better for farmers, I'm afraid it did. I'm afraid it made it worse.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us once again. After the break, I'll be speaking to one of the farmers facing the harsh reality of Labour's brutal war on landowners and family businesses.
I'm Patrick Christie's. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Apparently, in the Mail, page 5, hard-pressed bosses already having to deal with deadlines, red tape and staff who won't actually come into the office over Christmas. And they're saying that Christmas parties this year are going to be as lame as ever because everyone's afraid of basically getting cancelled or misbehaving or getting sacked for their behaviour. Would you risk it, Trey, at Christmas?
Do you know, I've actually never had a normal job in my life, so I wouldn't last a second because I'm not very politically correct. But it must be horrendous, really, because rather than enjoying yourself, you're having to completely always censor yourself. And it might be the most innocent of stuff that's said to someone that they then take offence to, which means you're going to probably just keep your mouth shut, which doesn't sound like the best of parties, does it, really?
No. Tricky one, isn't it? Because you're not at work, so it's not an office issue if, you know, some banter and it's taken the wrong way. But still, it's still a work environment, isn't it?
Yeah. If HR shows up, it's a work party. It's a work event.
HR shows up, I'm gone.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. And so even for us this year, first of all, it's the first year we're calling it a holiday party. I don't know how I felt about that.
Really? What, your company's doing that?
Yeah, they're calling it a holiday party.
Oh, no, well, no.
Yeah, I know. I voted against.
So they got rid of the word
Christmas.
Why?
Because we want to be inclusive.
How's it not inclusive to call it Christmas?
I know. Trust me.
Are you still going to go? I wouldn't bother going. I'd say no.
I am going to go, but I'm going to go dressed as Mrs. Claus, and it's going to be Christmassy, and I'm going to make sure that Christmas enters the door with me.
Yeah, you spread that Christian vibe.
100%. But outside of that, there is that element of HR showing up, and HR will be sober, and they've already prepped them to say, like, listen, this isn't your party. HR can have their party. This is your hangout.
Yeah.
Make sure everyone's being PC.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, It happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about farming and inheritance tax. Peter says, "Dear Sir Jacob, we keep hearing that we must pay our fair share of inheritance tax. Why? There's no such thing. For inheritance tax is inherently unfair. Abolish it. Make the case, Kemi, before Nigel does." Well, I completely agree. We should abolish inheritance tax. Another viewer says, very kindly, "Hello, Jacob. What a fantastic speech you gave today at the Farmers' Rally. I think this cruel tax on farmers is a ploy to obtain land for Labour's building and solar panel plans. Starmer is so arrogant that he cannot conceive he is capable of being wrong." And Richard says, "Farmers selling land is what Labour Party donors want. Labour donors want the land for wind turbines and solar panels, which farmers have been resisting." We're continuing our coverage of today's farmer protest. I'm joined now by the farmer and agricultural contractor, James McGregor. Mr. McGregor, thank you very much for joining me from your tractor. Now, can I ask you an important question? How much would a new tractor cost you?
Around £160,000 for a medium-sized sort of tractor.
So when you're getting towards this £1 million threshold, the tools of your trade before you get onto the land are a really important part of that.
Definitely. And the prices are just going up and up with machinery. We're having to buy bigger and more expensive machinery due to the fact that we just can't entice people into the industry as it is. So we're having to buy more expensive machinery to make up for that.
So you need better machinery because it's hard to employ people, because you work such extraordinarily long hours. How long is a typical day for you?
Recently, we start 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. The reason I'm sat in a tractor now is because we're actually out gritting the roads and clearing the snow for the council, so that'll be all through the night, and then we'll be back out again in the morning.
So this is an important point. You're not just doing your agricultural business, you're a crucial part of the community. And what would be the consequence if you had to sell 20% of your land to pay the tax? What would happen to your farming business, and what do you think would happen to your contribution locally?
Well, I think it's clear to see what's going to happen with the land. Is it 56% of agricultural land bought this year is by non-farming people? So clearly there's a land grab by people who aren't in agriculture. So the land will go wind turbines, things like that, carbon offset, and that's going to devastate the rural economy. It's not just the farmers, it's contractors like myself, it's the dealerships selling the tractors, the people selling the parlours. It affects everyone.
Absolutely. So it changes the whole of the rural way of life, and this is what the Labour government seems to want to do.
It would seem that way. It would definitely seem that way. I can't understand any other reason that they'd hit us like they have done. It just seems like a Stalinist land grab to me.
Well, it's the collectivisation of farms, isn't it? Try and get it out of the hands of individuals and families and try and put in more state control and to concentrate less on food production. So I assume we'll have to import more if this goes forward.
Yes, with things like they are in the Middle East and in the Ukraine at the moment, you would have thought food security would have been at the top of the agenda, really, not the other way around.
Well, that's such a good point. When we are threatened by Russia, where our relationships with China aren't as good as we might like them to be, and yet we're making agriculture in this country harder, it can't possibly be the right policy to follow.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, the amount of grain that the Ukraine used to export, there's obviously issues there. It's the main thing is, like I say, we should be looking after ourselves when it comes to food security.
Well, James, thank you very much. I hope you get some rest today, because you seem to be working practically 24 hours a day, typical of the farming community, and I hope you're successful in this campaign. Thank you.
That's it. Perfect.
Great. Thank you. Well, with me now is my panel, my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and journalist and author Michael Crick. Michael, I thought Sean Simon was very interesting, actually. He's an intelligent man, but he was pointing out, reminding us that it isn't just farmers, it's other small businesses that are going to be hit by this, particularly ones that are asset-heavy. So if you have a business that is asset-light, you'll be fine, a service industry. But if you're in manufacturing or agriculture, then you're going to be really hit by this tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've made a serious error here of the government. I'm not saying they should reverse it entirely. But I think the problem is that the Labour Party doesn't, despite all the efforts it put into schmoozing business, and, you know, a couple of years ago I remember at the Labour conference thinking, gosh, businesses are taking over the Labour Party. Well, I was totally wrong on that. But there are hardly any MPs who've got experience of working in business or run businesses of their own, and there are probably no MPs who have been farmers themselves. But, of course, what's happened to the election is you've got all these new rural MPs, probably more than Labour's ever had, but they're not influential yet. They're inexperienced. They've never been MPs before, nearly all of them, and they're not ministers. All the people who are senior members of the government are people with from urban constituencies. But, I mean, the aim, I think, the thinking behind this was that there are wealthy landowners as well, people who have big farms, and they should be paying their fare of inheritance tax, or at least a contribution towards inheritance tax. But the trouble is that they've got the thresholds at wrong levels and so on, and that's why it's all gone wrong. There is time to change all this, because, of course, these measures aren't coming in until 2026, 18 months from now, although the government is adamant, both publicly and privately, that it's not going to change, but we'll see.
But this is a very urban government, that's Michael's point,
yes,
even though...
But it's also not only urban, it's a class war government. Take Starmer's view of the farmers. Intransigent, he is going to be. I have no doubt about that, having seen what he did over energy. And then compare it with how he treated the train drivers or any other union that came a-calling. And the bottom line on all this is that you are watching him paying out to his friends and attacking people he considers his enemies. So in relation to the farmers, I think that the solution will eventually come out. People have to be farmers. I do not want to see investment bankers who've just trousered 28 million quid in putting together some couple of sweet companies, right, saying, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my money. I'm going to save myself my inheritance tax. I'm going to go and buy 5,000 acres in Dorset. I do not want to see that, right? By the way, most thing I don't want to see actually IHT under any circumstances, but I don't want to see this going on. But I do believe that with what's happening in private schools and now what's happening with farmers, they are doing what they said they would do, but haven't used that word since, right? Before the election, what was the word that came out, right? All like that. They do not like intergenerational wealth. They want to stop you handing down your money to other people. And honestly, I feel very upset that if I'm a train driver, I just come up and I say, I'm going to stop the 743. Oh, how much do you want? Oh, I'm a doctor. I'm going to kill your nan. Oh, how much do you want? Right?
Both of those decisions were taken on free market grounds, in that we haven't got enough doctors and we haven't got enough train drivers.
That's simply not true on train drivers. There's an enormous number of applicants per free job in train drivers.
They're not signed up yet. The other day, a train of mine was cancelled. Fortunately, I got a refund because there was no train driver. On the Starmer point, it's interesting, actually. Starmer himself actually does have a rural background. I mean, I've been to the house he lived in.
His first job was on a farm.
And if you go to the house he was, which I have done for a film I made, I mean, he had there's a field at the back, which is where the family donkey sanctuary was. He must have a bit of an appreciation for the countryside.
Michael, it's the whole anti-business thing, as you were saying. So today there's the letter from the retailers who are being absolutely whacked by these extra costs. They're going to have to fire people and put prices up. It's a whole anti-business approach. anti-family business approach that is very damaging to the economy.
There are undoubtedly some people in the Labour Party who will be anti-business and who will think that all farmers are incredibly wealthy. But I think the real problem is that Labour went too far in the promises that it made before the election. But they should have bunged income tax up or national insurance.
They should have told the truth. Right, which is actually we're going to bash the living daylights out of you, even having made these other promises. It's an absolute disgrace.
Well, I mean, any government probably would have put the taxes up in some way.
Okay, supposing
I'm not sure about that. We could cut the size of the state, but we're going to have to move on to talk about
that too would have cost jobs.
More in relation to honesty in government, because more revelations have emerged about Rachel Reeves and her previous claims about her qualifications. Find out what she's been saying that isn't true in a moment.
Good evening. I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Lots of cold weather around at the moment, some harsh frosts, also some wintry showers in places too. But why is it unseasonably cold? Well, the low pressure system that brought the last night's heavy rain and snow for some parts has now cleared away towards the east, and that's allowed for us to drag in our air from the north, a cold direction, bringing Arctic air to many places. It is quite a clear air mass though, so for many it's actually going to be dry overnight, the exception being in places exposed to that brisk northerly wind where we will see frequent wintry showers with some snow accumulations building up in places and icy patches too. Because of the clear skies and that northerly wind, temperatures plummeting tonight, a widespread harsh frost. Across parts of Scotland, temperatures last night dropped to -11, and it could be even colder than that this coming night, -12 perhaps in some places with lying snow. First thing tomorrow morning, a harsh frost then across Scotland. Watch out for some icy patches and some lying snow in places, particularly towards the north. A similar story across parts of Northern Ireland, down the eastern side of England and also into parts of Wales. Here there will be some fairly frequent showers. They could quite readily be falling as sleet or snow, and so some disruption is quite likely as we go through the morning rush hour. Elsewhere and further inland, a lot of dry weather to be had, and it is generally going to stay dry and sunny as we go through tomorrow. But still, in areas exposed to that brisk northerly wind, we will continue to see some showers, and they could penetrate a bit further inland at times. These temperatures are significantly below average for the time of year, and when you factor in some strong winds coming from the north, it is going to feel bitterly cold. As we go into Thursday, there is the potential for some unsettled weather to push into the southwest. Bit of uncertainty, we could see some heavy rain, perhaps even some snow over the higher ground here. Further north, it's a similar day to today really, wintry showers continuing to pile in from the north, otherwise some sunny spells. By Saturday, things are looking very wet and windy indeed. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we're still talking about farming, the protest today, and Paul says, "Dear Jacob, thank you for inviting Neil Hudson on State of the Nation. I'd never heard of him before. I think he came across as very intelligent, articulate, and is a credit to the Conservative Party." Well, Paul, you'll be glad to know he said he might come back. So Dan says, Labour's IHT charge is blatantly forced redistribution of wealth. Farmers will have to sell their land, and who will buy it? Not other farmers, but Rayner will dictate that it's used for house building over the green belt in pursuit of her unachievable target. Labour's class war is out in the open. Rachel told such dreadful lies, it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes. Her aunt, who from her earliest youth had kept a strict regard for truth, attempted to believe the child. The effort very nearly made her wild, and would have done so had not she discovered this infirmity. The Westminster gossip site Guido Fawkes has revealed that Rachel Reeves claimed to be an economist in an official legal filing back in 2008, the very time at which she amended on her LinkedIn page from economist to retail banking. So is this more evidence of the Chancellor being economic with the truth about her qualifications? A Treasury source claimed Reeves worked in retail banking covering various areas, drawing on her background as an economist. Now, to be clear, we cannot assume Miss Reeves' intentions here, so my poem, which I borrowed and slightly amended from Hilaire Belloc, which claimed Rachel told such dreadful lies, should not detract from the fact that there could be a more innocent explanation for this hiccup. Well, I'm joined now by Lloyd Russell-Moyle, who was on the programme yesterday defending the Chancellor. The noble Lloyd comes to the rescue once again. I mean, you really are Rachel Reeves' knight in shining armour. How do you defend her this time for, on an official form, getting her job wrong? Is she a knave or a fool?
Well, the amount of time that I'm defending her, I expect to get her peerage not. Look, let's be very clear here. The form she filled in does not say job. It does not say what is your current employment. It says what is your business profession. And she filled in economist. She had worked as an economist in the Bank of England, and it's quite usual for people who are between jobs or working in another job, but their professional background is that, to fill that in. An economist is not a regulated profession. If she'd said that she was a chartered accountant and wasn't a registered chartered accountant, that is a registered profession and you can get into an awful lot of trouble. Same if you claim to be a police officer. But an economist is a broad brush activity and profession that anyone can claim to be if they are interested in economics. And she had worked as an economist for the Bank of England. Now, I think what we have here is, of course, someone who is broadly saying, I work in economics and finance, and filling in those forms genuinely. I do think she is getting herself into a bit of a pickle. I do think that it would be better for her to come out and just be very clear about that she was correcting her LinkedIn so that she applied the ministerial code and she was being fair and honest with people, and that when she'd written the LinkedIn, it wasn't as full as detail as people expect a politician, because she was writing it at the time as a non-politician, and many people will write broad brushstrokes on their LinkedIn that aren't the detail that we would require as a cabinet minister. I think if she just came out and said those things, it would be fine. And what I do think, and I said this on your show before, I think the public are pretty fed up with playing the ball and not the person. When people tried to go after Boris, the left tried to go after Boris, saying he'd lied and been sacked in a newspaper and he'd lied for having an affair.
You made the point yesterday, and I'm sure the viewers remember it. But isn't it part of a pattern? You see that from little things, those you trust in little things you can trust in big, and that you've seen so many things that haven't turned out to be true. So Keir Starmer said to the National Farmers Union a couple of years ago that he wouldn't increase tax on farming. He said they wouldn't increase tax on working people, so they wouldn't increase national insurance. It's just a pattern of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister not telling the truth. And perhaps she said economist because the point she filled out the form admitting you were a banker was a very unpopular thing to do, so she used a little bit of title inflation to look better. But that's not a good way to behave.
Well, as I said, it doesn't ask what your job is. It asks what business profession you have, what training you've got, what the background is that you've got. But I disagree with you. I think that they haven't increased national insurance for working people. They've increased it for the business part of the side of it. Well, we've had met that argument over numerous times. So I don't buy your argument that there is a raft of broken promises here. I do think on this thing, it is looking a bit murky. It would be better if she just came out and explained what happened to everyone. But I don't think it is such a big issue. And actually what's most important is what she's doing in terms of policies for the economy. Some will dislike it. Some will be very happy with it.
All right. Well, thank you, Lloyd, as always. Well, with me now is my most pugnacious panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the journalist and author, Michael Crigg. Now, Michael, you were calling for her to resign at breakfast yesterday.
That's right, because I think this is very serious, because it's not just the case we've talked about here, her changing her LinkedIn to reflect the fact that she wasn't an economist at the Royal Bank of Scotland. She was basically dealing with complaints and IT. I mean, it's tricky, that one, because once you're who's an economist, as Lloyd Russell Moyle says. So there's that one. The second one is that she said she said in a video, which came out 2 years ago, that she'd worked at the Bank of England for the best part of a decade. Well, she was actually at the Bank of England for 6 years, and one of those years she was doing a Masters in Economics at the LSE. Well, I don't think most people would say 6 years or 5 years was the best part of a decade, so that's an embellishment. And then, of course, there's the incident of a couple of years ago when she brought out a book about female politicians, and it was discovered that there were at least 20 instances of stuff being frankly plagiarised, paragraphs lifted from Wikipedia and the Guardian articles and things like that. Now, each of these things is fairly trivial, but taken together, it doesn't look very good. I think probably I went too far in saying she should resign, and anyway, it's not going to happen. But I do think she should, as Lloyd Russell Moyle says, she should come out and apologise and say she's going to be more careful in future, because this is important, the way our all politicians behave. Previous politicians have done worse. Ian Duncan Smith did worse. I discovered in a Newsnight film I made. Jeffrey Archer was selected as your candidate for Mayor of London when he'd done appalling things.
Rachel did appalling things.
Indeed.
We can go through.
Yeah,
yes.
but some of those people are pretty recent.
But this is different. Rachel Reeves is the sort of person, if you shake hands with her, you count your fingers afterwards.
Well, I think her problem is called a profession that I know a little about, called journalism, right? Because every time, if one more shoe to drop now, and she could find herself in a degree of difficulty. For instance, it has been raised, when she applied for a mortgage back in, we'll say, prior to 2010, her and her husband, what did she claim she was doing then? I mean, there is a difference. She knew full well, being an economist, that sounds like a big title, right? Working in retail banking, where you could be actually, behind the counter, there is a complete difference in it. And so I would say for her, right now, it's quite an interesting political story. It becomes a scandal if she's used it in some way to gain financial preferment.
And I thought Lloyd's defence of her was very gallant. Yeah. But The Economist is not the
Well, he's out of work, so he's looking for a job.
I'm pretty certain that form, for the registration form that came out today, said her occupation. And she gave her occupation as being an economist, which is an exaggeration.
Isn't a catch-all term. If you were to say banker or financier, those are catch-all terms. But economist is really quite specific.
You're a Labour politician and you put the word banker down as your job. You will become an ex-Labour politician. In fact, you become like Mr. Moyle there. He'll be gone.
And that's the point, isn't it? That she knew what she was doing. She didn't want to admit to being a banker because bankers in 2008 were even less popular than politicians, if such a thing is possible.
Possibly. That may have been the motive. Got to be very careful about attributing motives to people.
True.
But I think overall it doesn't look good, and she's got to clean up her act. And there are lessons here. My message to anybody in their teenage years thinking of going into politics is get your CV straight now, because if you embellish it, or if you lie on it, as so many politicians have, it will come back to bite you.
Always comes back to bite you. What would you be doing if you were editor of The Sun today? Would it be big story tomorrow?
When I ran it was successful. It wasn't.
I know. Sold millions of copies.
Your Sun in your days wasn't always entirely truthful itself.
No, it wasn't. It did its best, but we were misled by police officers and the like. Yes, I would be pouring a rather large bucket on them. But, of course, now that they have said vote, it's incredible. And Rupert Murdoch hasn't paid a penny in personal tax for about 1,000 years, right? Now he's telling his Sun readers, you're like Labour, and then immediately they bring in IHT up to the neck. So I would be pouring a bucket on it, but the current lot are enslaved to their decision to vote Labour. So I'm afraid they'll probably be sticking on page 28 and hoping nobody reads it.
Well, let's hope the Fire Brigade aren't called round to 11 Downing Street this evening, because otherwise Rachel may find they don't turn up. Thank you to my panel. After the messages, I'll be speaking to a Hong Kong democracy activist as dozens of dissidents are thrown into prison by the Chinese communists in the biggest national security trial yet.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The number of pubs may reach critically low levels.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing is a decline in the number of pubs in Britain, and it's fallen. This is an absolutely astonishing figure. So it's basically fallen 10% in a decade. So do our math. It doesn't take very long for that to happen. So if that carries on, we'd have, get this, only 1,000 pubs by 2074. So the big question is, what will become extinct first? The bank branch on your high street, or the pub on your street corner? And this is a kind of perfect storm for landlords and landladies of, the cost of labour. We saw, remember when the energy prices were at the high, we just realised just how much energy it keeps to keep the lights on in the local boozer. Yeah. As well as, as the cost of the golden nectar itself. So, as they call it in Australia.
Well, talking about that, I was mentioning the other day to, was it my father-in-law? I said, when I first started going to the pub, I was 15,
Okay.
Half a lemonade, half a shandy.
I was nearly 16, I got half a shandy. No, we used to have Monday Club, where a pint of Foster's was £1.50. And my father-in-law was saying, I went to London the other day, a pint was £8.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And when you've got those kind of prices, why wouldn't you just go down the supermarket and get 16 tinnies for £5?
So you're going all Aussie now. Put the tinnies in the esky before you have the bar then.
Good day, mate. Why not?
I agree, actually. I think it's concerning. A lot of people look at the high streets and they're very concerned that it's looking quite glum, to be honest. Lots of things are closing. But the reality is it's because people are not buying from the high street. They're not going to the pub, People are just deciding, what they're going to do in their spare time. Are they really going to go to the pub, or are they going to potentially go to, David Lloyd or a Nuffield, join a gym membership? They're just looking at their expenses and just deciding, what, we're going to actually cut costs,
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, yesterday at the G20 summit, a meeting was held between Sir Keir Starmer and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
We are concerned by reports of Jimmy Lai's deterioration health in prison. You raised the Chinese embassy building in London when we spoke on the telephone, and we have since taken action by calling in that application. Now we have to follow the legal process and timeline.
Interestingly, Starmer appears to admit to kowtowing to the Chinese communists over their request for a mega embassy, probably a spy station in London. Not only did British journalists appear to be ushered out of the room when Jimmy Lai's imprisonment was mentioned, and less than 24 hours later, dozens of Hong Kong democracy activists were imprisoned in the largest national security trial yet, including one man for 10 years. So should we really be seeking a reset in relations with China, as the Prime Minister has put it? Well, I'm joined now by Chung Ching Kwong, the Hong Kong democracy activist. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
As a democracy activist, would you feel safe going back to Hong Kong at the moment?
No, I can't go back to Hong Kong, as a matter of fact. The fact that I'm standing here talking to you and the previous work I've done to call for sanctions against certain Hong Kong officials mean that I'm colluding with foreign forces. And that means I will not be able to go back. If I go back, I'll end up like my friends and colleagues who were sentenced this morning.
Now, 45 people were sentenced today for up to 10 years in prison. Tell me, what had they done to warrant these sentences?
Those 45 pro-democracy activists, and some of which I can call friends, they merely participated in a primary election trying to secure majority in the Legislative Council in Hong Kong so that we have enough of a bargaining power to tell the government that you have to give us universal suffrage. Because as promised in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, promised in the Basic Law, And those things are basic human rights, and those should be fulfilled. But then they were being put behind bars and in arbitrary detention for 3 years before today. Now, some of them are sentenced for 5 years, some of them 7, and some of them even sentenced for 10 years.
And Britain's responsibility to Hong Kong is a very serious one, isn't it? That Hong Kong became British in 1841, then the new territories came over, and the lease ran out on those in 1997. But we'd done an agreement with China, the joint declaration that protected Hong Kong's way of life for 50 years. And for a few years, that went perfectly well. But now, the Hong Kong way of life isn't being protected at all.
No, not at all. The Sino-British Joint Declaration is a treaty between China and the UK, lodged at the UN. And since then, China has just single-handedly torn the treaty, but the UK hasn't actually done anything other than empty hand-wringing, saying we're deeply concerned. We issued a 6-month report every year, twice every year, and say that, oh, we're very concerned, there has been a breach, but they haven't done anything, not even lodged a complaint.
And what do you think we should do? What can we do? China is big and powerful and rich. What should the British government do?
I mean, the least that the UK government can do is to at least sanction some of the individuals that are responsible for implementing the national security law in Hong Kong, like the US done. Like the US does not have a historical tie with Hong Kong, but they have sanctioned at least 11 Hong Kong officials. But the UK has sanctioned none. That doesn't make any sense, and at least review the way that we're dealing with China and Hong Kong to reflect the current political reality, instead of saying, yeah, this is bad, but we want investment, but we want businesses with Hong Kong and China.
But I think people overstate our dependence on China, because it's mainly one way. We import an enormous amount from China. The Chinese economy is an export-led economy. If China gets cross with us, they're not going to stop selling us goods because the Chinese economy is weakening at the moment.
But that isn't an argument to say, hey, we should continue our dependency. Like the Labour government has promised to do a China audit, but before that audit is even completed, they are now already saying, yeah, we're going to greenlight this investment. And Keir Starmer said, we're going to greenlight that embassy. We're going to do this and that with China. And we want to have more investment, less surprise factors and so on. And these things does not add up to the fact that we actually acknowledge that we are overly dependent on China. It feels like there is a split personality between like these policies, like where does the government actually stand?
Well, I don't think the Conservative government was any better, actually. I think we were just as weak in relation to China. We didn't make proper complaints over Jimmy Lai. Indeed, only David Cameron was willing to accept that he was a British citizen and not accept the Chinese nonsense that he had dual nationality when he left China, fled China as a child. So I'm afraid I'm pretty ashamed of how Britain has behaved all the way through. But how is this changing the spirit of Hong Kong? I was lucky to live there for a few years, and Hong Kong had this wonderful spirit of enterprise and prosperity and very business-like country. What's happening now?
Right now, the civil society that was one very vibrant and very interesting has been stifled. There is no room for any kind of political speech. You either agree with the government or you hide it and not talk about it. So there is no like very highly visible political movement that people can see. So some people would think, oh, Hong Kong is dead, it's a lost cause now. But it's actually not the case. If you look closely into what the 45 that are sentenced this morning have said in court or before, they actually tried very hard to make themselves heard by the world, and they really wish that the world would not forget them and keep them in their minds and in their prayers, if you do pray, and so that the Hong Kong spirit will not fade away. And right now, the economy in Hong Kong is very bad, but at the same time, the Hong Kong government is trying to pretend that everything is okay. It's as a business as normal. And sadly, the UK government seemed to be buying into the business as usual practice and say, yeah, there might be some risk doing business in Hong Kong, but you can still go. It's fine.
We are failing in our historic responsibility. Thank you so much for coming in, Chung. Martin Daubney is standing in for Patrick Christie's, which is coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. Now, it's a little bit chilly in Somerset overnight. The sun is no doubt shining, but it'll be getting better tomorrow, and even if we have snow, it'll be lovely.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. I'm here with your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Lots of cold weather around at the moment, some harsh frosts, also some wintry showers in places too. But why is it unseasonably cold? Well, the low pressure system that brought the last night's heavy rain and snow for some parts has now cleared away towards the east, and that's allowed for us to drag in our air from the north, a cold direction, bringing Arctic air to many places. It is quite a clear air mass though, so for many it's actually going to be dry overnight, the exception being in places exposed to that brisk northerly wind where we will see frequent wintry showers with some snow accumulations building up in places and icy patches too. Because of the clear skies and that northerly wind, temperatures plummeting tonight, a widespread harsh frost. Across parts of Scotland, temperatures last night dropped to -11, and it could be even colder than that this coming night, -12 perhaps in some places with lying snow. First thing tomorrow morning, a harsh frost then across Scotland. Watch out for some icy patches and some lying snow in places, particularly towards the north. A similar story across parts of Northern Ireland, down the eastern side of England and also into parts of Wales. Here there will be some fairly frequent showers. They could quite readily be falling as sleet or snow, and so some disruption is quite likely as we go through the morning rush hour. Elsewhere and further inland, a lot of dry weather to be had, and it is generally going to stay dry and sunny as we go through tomorrow. But still, in areas exposed to that brisk northerly wind, we will continue to see some showers, and they could penetrate a bit further inland at times. These temperatures are significantly below average for the time of year, and when you factor in some strong winds coming from the north, it is going to feel bitterly cold. As we go into Thursday, there is the potential for some unsettled weather to push into the southwest. Bit of uncertainty, we could see some heavy rain, perhaps even some snow over the higher ground here. Further north, it's a similar day to today really, wintry showers continuing to pile in from the north, otherwise some sunny spells. By Saturday, things are looking very wet and windy indeed. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries